His whole idea was to be able to express feelings through his jewelry.
The world has to discover this work and see how important it is. We've really struck gold here with the work of John Paul Miller.
He has this incredible amount of talent. He was indeed the quiet genius.
I was in Saturday morning classes in 1923 at the Cleveland Museum of Art every Saturday for years, and then finally went to the art school when I had Kenny Bates, first enameling I ever did, and I had Otto Egge and Paul Travis on Saturday morning. The first year in art school, I sat next to Fred Miller, and he was doing jewelry. I'd always wanted to learn how to make jewelry, so he said, well, I'll show you. So I started making jewelry from the first year on through art school. I had Vic Schreckengoss. He was really a brilliant man. I majored in industrial design, and my senior year, the director of the school called me into the office and said, you're going to teach. So for the rest of the year, I taught nature research and techniques. The next year, they asked me to come back and teach, and then late June, I went in the Army to Fort Knox. I was to be a tank driver. They wanted people who would paint each chapel at Fort Knox. I started the painting, and about that time, Pearl Harbor happened. And I thought immediately, I'll be taken off the job, and he said, no, you're going to complete the job. I took a little box of tools and silver, and I had a little blowtorch. I made rings and brooches for soldiers to give their girlfriends.
In 1950, I started working at the Institute, and John was already an established member. He'd been in the service and come back. In the service, he painted, he did their graphic design. He also designed the patent tank, which he never got the credit for. He mounted all the shows for the school. He taught design.
Of any teacher or anybody I have ever encountered in my life, John Paul Miller is the most brilliant, the most perceptive, the best teacher I ever had. He brought out of me the ability to think about things deeper than what was just going to be on the surface.
He drew very great inspiration not only from being here in Northeast Ohio and teaching at the Cleveland Institute of Art, but he found a client base here, people who knew him and loved his work and wanted to support this activity and buy these beautiful things that he was making.
One day, the director of the school at that time called me in his office, and he said, Cleveland has enough good watercolor painters. We needed a good goldsmith. Why don't you devote your time to your goldsmithing and forget painting? I never considered the jewelry anything more than just sort of a hobby up to that point.
And then John, year after year, won the prize at the May Show. He's never lost his curiosity. When he saw this Etruscan show at the museum, he thought, how did they do that?
John Paul Miller recreated this ancient technique of granulation in which small decorative beads of gold are affixed to an underlying gold surface. So you can look at the objects and understand how these tiny granulations come together to make patterns and textures, and the contrast between the portions of the surfaces of these objects, which are very smooth and streamlined, is really stunning.
He discovered this granulation technique for which he would become very, very famous amongst craftsmen in the 20th century. And so this necklace was one of the first that he created right after he rediscovered that technique.
This show, to me, demonstrated that we've been missing something. It was a massive discovery of this incredible talent in our midst. John Paul Miller is a guy who didn't seek the attention because he was more interested in just going to that workshop every night and doing his work and teaching. Those were the things that fed him, that nurtured him, and kept him going all these years.
He was so enamored of the shapes and forms in nature, which he then in his drawings would begin to abstract. So what he sees is the elegance of forms in nature, and then he makes them more elegant.
I always thought it would be great if I could make things that women wouldn't normally want to be around. I could make one in gold that a woman would wear.
These are small, exquisitely crafted, decorative objects. It's really a sense of delight and wonder about the natural world, because he's interested in spiders and crabs and crustaceans of various kinds. And he looks at them and he sees these beautiful structures.
I like the possibility of just taking a simple form and then really musically developing a surface. I think through looking and seeing and drawing, you get to know the world around you.
One of the greatest qualities of John Paul Miller's work is that he always knew when to stop, and he always let the piece tell him when it was finished. That can be seen throughout these magnificent works.
He's persistent, conscientious, precise. He's always moving ahead. In terms of his creativity, there's no question that John is a genius.
People will be so blown away by the beauty of what he's done that the jewelry of John Paul Miller will never go out of style.